Hi, welcome to Actualol. I'm Jon Purkis. In this video, I'm counting down my top 50 board games of all time, numbers 30 to 21. Before I do, the future of the channel is at stake. I can't afford to keep making videos long term, and I'm looking for your help to support Actualol. In return, you'll get the exclusive monthly newsletter where I talk about games I don't review on the channel, and a special lanyard and badge to show the rest of the gaming community how awesome you are. To join up, go to patreon.com/Actualol. There's a link below. Right, let's get to the list. If I've reviewed the game I'm talking about before on the channel, I'll put a link to the video. Just click the I in the top right corner. And number 30 is The Pursuit of Happiness. This is a light strategy game about living the perfect life. So you control a character from their childhood through the rest of their life, and you take on hobbies and jobs and partners. You might have children. Every decision you make is about trying to be happy. And everything makes sense with the theme. You tell such an interesting story with this, and that's why I love this. I love that theme of living life, but I also love how good of a story you can tell in this game. Every time you play, you're gonna live this completely different life, and I still remember the games I've played where I had someone that was in a motorcycle gang and then they go into an artsy job. And then I remember playing one time where I had this really high-powered job where I was making loads and loads of money, but I never had the time to actually enjoy that money. And I ended up wishing that I'd retired sooner, and it created stress for me, and then you end up dying earlier than the other players. There's so many different paths to that happiness, and nothing's necessarily the right or wrong answer, but you're trying to find things that work with each other. So for example, you will take a partner, but are they a partner that appreciates the things that you're into? If you have a job that is creative, does your partner like that, or are they the kind of partner that just wants lots of money to buy lots of things? What's interesting is that the time management system of the game means that if you spend a lot of time on your work or your partner or having kids, that means you might not even have the time to actually get happiness from other things. So you'll have a certain number of time pawns, and you are spending them to do certain stuff in and around. So you might go and advance your hobby, or you might go and get a new job. But as you start to get things in your life, like jobs and partners and kids, they take up time. So as the game goes on, you actually have less time to spend. If you're going to stick to the job and the partner that you have, they are just going to eat up time right at the start of the round, and that's it. It's locked in. You actually have less to think about because you have less time to spend. So there's this interesting arc to the game where it actually sort of speeds up because everyone's locked into the life that they've created. Of course, you are able to switch out of that if it's not working for you, and you can retire, and that'll free up some time. But it just makes so much sense. That is, of course, how life works, and everything in this game really fits the theme and feels like it just clicks in your head. So, for example, you can have a hobby and a job and a partner. If you want to take on more on top of that, that's going to stress you out, and that's probably mean that you're going to die earlier than the other players. Or if you're trying to get an artsy job, you're going to need creativity to get that job. So you should take on a hobby that advances your creativity, and that means that you're suitable for that kind of thing now. So you're looking for stuff that synergizes well with each other. So it plays like any other strategy game. You want things that work well together, but it also just makes so much sense with this life that you're planning out. And if you suddenly try and take all these weird directions, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get a job if you don't have the background behind it. And I just love it. That's The Pursuit of Happiness. And number 29 is Celestia. This is a push your luck game with a great bluffing element. You're all in an airship together and you're sailing through the clouds. You're trying to get as far as possible. But one player each round plays as a captain. They roll some dice and they represent the hazards that are facing the airship. They have to play cards to deal with those hazards, or the ship will crash. The other players don't know what cards the captain has. The captain has to stay in the ship, so they're going to crash if they haven't got the cards, regardless. But the other players have the opportunity to get out before the captain reveals whether they're playing the cards or not. So they have to decide, do they think the captain has the cards? Well, there's a little bit of card counting. You can see, okay, they got 6 cards in their hand. They might have the ones that they need. But also there's just this great element of bluffing, because the captain might want people to get out so that they can just sail through on their own and only be the only person that gets all the great points further on. They might want everyone to stay in because they don't have the cards, and then everyone then has to crash and everyone gets 0 points rather than them getting out now, getting some points and the captain getting nothing on their own, there's always a great reason to try and throw people off one way or the other. And the part of the game where you're just sort of seeing what the captain's saying or just looking at their eyes and trying to decide whether you trust them is brilliant. There is, you know, just that essence of push your luck. Do you think the chances are that we're going to survive? But what makes it so much better than your average push your luck game is it also comes down to, do you believe the captain? Do you think that they're lying to you or not? There's these bonus cards in the game that add extra surprises, like you can get back in the ship if you just got out and the ship carries on, or you can force a reroll of the dice to make it even harder for the captain. This game creates big moments, whether it's a bluff that just really pays off and screws everyone over, or when you get through on your own and manage to get to that final cloud and get loads more points than everyone else. It's one of my favorite bluffing games, and I really like what the expansions add as well, where the players can have cards that help the captain, but then they can bluff about whether they can help the captain. That is Celestia. And number 28 is Dark Moon. This is a hidden traitor game where you're all supposed to be working together to survive on a mining outpost on the moon, but some of you are hidden traitors, infected, who are trying to sabotage the cause from within and without revealing themselves. So you take it in turns to do an action. You're maybe trying to repair the shields or repair the life support, and at the end of each turn there's going to be a task, and you want to, as good guys, succeed that task so that you can get off the moon eventually, complete all your missions and win as the good guys. But the bad guys are trying to stop those things from happening. And the way it works is that you choose an action, and let's say I want to repair the shields. I roll some dice behind a little personal shield that I have, and then I take one of those dice and reveal it to the other players. If it's positive, I'll succeed in what I'm trying to do, and it will make me look like a good guy. But if it's negative, then it won't work. I've wasted my turn and I'm fairly useless, and so suddenly people are going to accuse me of being infected. But what's so great about the game is that the dice are weighted towards being negative, so it's much more likely that you'll roll negative results than positive. And often, as a good guy, you will roll negative stuff and not have an explanation as to why you're sabotaging things. And that's where the accusations come in, and that's where this murkiness of you don't know who is quite what. Now, of course, you can track certain things, like how many dice did you get to roll? It's more likely that you'll roll something negative and not have a choice if you only have 1 or 2 dice. If you have 4 dice, why are they all negative? It's also sort of about the timing of things and the decisions that you make. There are so many things for people to pick up on, and then ultimately when you reveal those dice, even if they are negative, how believable is your face? Is it really a shock to you? Are you really upset that you're having to play a negative thing? Or does it actually seem like you wanted to do that and you've chosen to do that because you're a bad guy? It's a really simple system that just puts you all at each other's throats, creates so much murkiness and unknown as to who is what, and creates all those arguments that you want from this kind of game. I actually don't have any typical social deduction games in my top 50. I don't have the Resistance or Werewolf or Secret Hitler. I tend to prefer the slightly deeper hidden traitor games, and the experiences I've had with Dark Moon are just like nothing else. That is Dark Moon. And number 27 is Cockroach Poker. This is an amazing bluffing card game that distills down into the most purest form bluffing in just this tiny box. So everyone's got a hand of cards of these different animals such as rats and flies and stink bugs. And on your turn, you take one of those cards and you give it to another player face down, and you say to them, this is a rat or this is a fly. They have to decide whether you're telling the truth or not. So you are trying to throw them off one way or the other, but ultimately not be caught out. So if it is a fly and you say this is a fly, and they say, yes, you're right, it is a fly, they reveal it, and you get the card in front of you, which is bad. You don't want cards in front of you. But if you say this is a fly, and it is a fly, and they say, no, it's not a fly, and they reveal it, then it goes in front of them, because they were wrong. So it doesn't really matter what you say, it's all about how you say it and how you sell it. And as the game builds up, you are starting to collect animals in front of you that you don't want. And so then there's even more reason to say certain things and give people certain cards, because if you end up having 4 of the same type of animal in front of you, you lose the game. And you're the only person that loses and everyone else effectively wins, or at least doesn't lose. So that's an interesting thing about this game, is that there's not a winner as such, there's just a loser, but it fits the theme pretty well. And another thing you can do if you're not sure about taking the card is that you can look at the card and then pass it on to someone else and then tell them what it is. So you're bluffing with the other person now, because if I've said it's a fly, they look at it and they actually see it's a rat, what are they then going to say to the next person? They could continue with the fly theme, they could say it's a rat, or they could throw in another animal. And now this second person or third person is having to listen to what both of you have said and decide who's telling the truth between you, or whether you're both lying. And they then have to make that decision. Yes, this is what the second person has just said. Yes, this is a fly. Yes, this is a rat. Or no, this isn't a rat. Or they can then pass it on again. If it gets round the entire circle and everyone's looked at it except one, then that person has to make that decision. But what's so interesting about passing it on is that it doesn't give you a free ride, because even though you weren't able to guess what I was saying, whether you could believe me or not, you then have to bluff yourself. And so you still at risk of being caught and found out, because you might be terrible at bluffing and they might be able to read you easily. Or they might have been able to read me originally, so they've kind of got double the information. And this is by far like my favorite bluffing card game to just pull out and teach to anyone. I feel like everyone should have this game in the collection, and it's one that I would give to people because I think it's a great introduction to how awesome modern games can be, that they can do something so great with something so simple. That's Cockroach Poker. And number 26 is Hollywood Golden Age. This is a classic auction game from Reiner Knizia. It was originally called Dream Factory. And in this game, you have scripts based on real films. So I've got here Roman Holiday, and you're trying to fill up this script with all the things that you would need to make a film. So you're going to need a director, an actor, a camera person, a composer, a seamstress, and also a star if you can get one. And when that's filled up, your movie will score, and you are competing with the other players to try and get the most points in your movie. And the way you're getting any of these people to work in your movie is that you're bidding on auctions. So on the board, there's a number of different auctions, and you can actually see some of the auctions that are coming up. So you can see what tiles are going to be available, and you can see, oh yeah, I really need a composer and a seamstress, and they're both available at the same time. So I'm going to bid big on that one, save my money now. So when you do an auction, it's pretty simple. You're just going around and bidding, and the highest bidder wins, and they get all of the things on that particular lot. But they then have to divide up the money that they gave between the other players. So no money ever comes into the game. It's always just moving around between the players. And if you bid big on something, that's going to make the other players rich. But of course, you might really want it. And then there's another interesting form of, I wouldn't even call it an auction, where you're going to these parties and the tiles are all face down until you walk into the party. And then the person who gets first pick from that is the person who has the most actors and stars in their existing movies. So you're competing with each other to be the most popular film mogul. And if you're friends with Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart, then they are going to connect you to the right people at the party, and you're going to get first dibs on the person there. So they might introduce you to some other famous actor or a really good director. And that's really great because it gives you this incentive to get actors early on and to get them into your movies, because then it's going to benefit you at those parties. So there's this interesting race for that, and constantly trying to keep up with the other players. But also every tile has a certain number of points on it. So some actors aren't as good as others, and some directors aren't as good as others. So you're fighting not over just getting the things that you need to fill up your movies, but also the most points. Because when you complete a movie, it is going to score a certain number of points. And then at the end of the year, you're going to compete for the Oscars effectively. If you made the best movie, you're going to win an award for it. You're trying to always get the most points and make the best movies. But at the same time, if you just can't get the auctions for those things, it's not necessarily worth holding out just to get the best of everything actually, let's just churn loads of movies out and get points that way. So there's an interesting balance as to how you spend your money, what things that you bid on. But what I love about it is the theme, and it's just such a simple, clean auction game, which you just come to expect from Reiner Knizia, but with a really nice theme to it. And all the different actors that you are bringing in, it's got really nice artwork, this game, but it's all based on films that you might have heard of and actors from that era that you would have heard of as well. And that brings something extra to it as you're playing the game. But it's a really tight auction game that comes down to ultimately trying to be the safest with your money, spending at the right times, just like any great auction game requires you to do. That is Hollywood Golden Age. And number 25 is Scrool, and I'm cheating a bit here, but I also would count Telestrations as part of this. I don't actually have the box for Telestrations anymore, but what I do is I use the cards for Scrool and I have the flip books from Telestrations, because it's effectively the same game. So you've given a clue at the start of the game. Everyone has a little thing that they're drawing in, and they have to draw that clue, and then they pass it around. That person can't see the original clue, but they have to guess based on the drawing what it is. And so then they write in the guess, and then they pass it around, and the next person has to draw based on that guess. So as you might imagine, the things start to adapt because people don't know what the original clue was, and the drawings aren't very good. And the fun of the game is in, at the end, just revealing it and seeing where people's minds went and what ridiculousness happened. And what's so great about Scrool is that they give you these amazing prompts that make it that bit funnier, make it more likely to go wrong. Because with Telestrations, it tended to be simple things like you might just say tennis, and you've got to draw tennis. And actually, people don't have that hard of a time of doing that. And so often it just all is the same guesses all the way through. And that's not that much fun. It's much funnier when people misinterpret things, or where you're having to be really challenging with what you're trying to draw, and then that just leads to way more misunderstanding. So Scrool might tell you to draw cuddling a ghost or putting makeup on an owl. This is probably my wife's favorite party game, and it's an absolute classic that anyone can play. It's only really good for a bigger group, so you want probably at least 6 people, but you can get the Telestrations party pack that goes up to like 12 people, because the more people, the more that clue is going to go on a journey, and so it's more likely to get even weirder. It just has you in hysterics by the end of it when you're revealing what happened, and this one's just been a mainstay for years. It's a great party game. That is Scrool or Telestrations. Number 24 is This War of Mine. This is a cooperative game where you're trying to survive a war zone. So you play these characters that live in this house that's trapped in a war zone. They're not soldiers, they're not fighting in this war, they're just trying to survive. So they need food and water and shelter, they need to be kept safe. And that is the crux of the game, and it's incredibly hard to do. So at the base of it, you've got this cooperative game that's really tight, really difficult, where you're just trying to get by. You're trying to find food, you're trying to collect water, you're trying to get enough sleep. You're trying to board up the house against the cold, and you have a limited amount of time with which to do all of this. And you're fighting against time constantly, but you also have to make sure you get enough sleep, because if you get tired, then that's going to make you ill possibly. And if you have illness, or if you have hunger, tiredness, depression, these are all things that can face your characters, and then that makes it harder for them to live their lives and harder for them to get themselves out of the situation that they're in. But what really brings the game alive is that the storybook in the game. So every evening you have the opportunity to go out to other locations and effectively scavenge. And so you will pick a location to visit. It might be an abandoned church, or a abandoned residential district, or a shopping center. And you will go there. You might go in pairs, or you might go with one character on their own. And you are moving around this location and encountering stuff. You might get lucky, you might find some food, you might find some weapons to protect yourself, or you might run into a bad person, whether it's a soldier or a scavenger, someone that's going to be violent to you. But when certain things happen, you will turn to this storybook, and the writing in this game is just incredible. It's such a dark, serious, adult subject matter, and yet they've dealt with it in such a brilliant way, where I remember every single passage that I've read from that book, where things happen, you're not expecting them, you have encounters with people, sometimes good, but mostly bad, sometimes in this moral grey area, and usually you're given a decision and it's like, do you trust this person? Do you steal from this person? The game asks you whether you want to be immoral or whether you want to do what it takes for you to survive, whether you think that they'll be fine without their food if you steal it. There's so many moral questions in the game, and I just really appreciate a game that deals with this kind of subject matter, that is taking board games to a new level, and amazingly doing it in a way that I've never found to be awkward or cringy or annoying or distasteful. It's treating what is a very heavy subject matter in a way that feels like a good book or a good movie. It makes you feel things. Now, I know some people would feel that playing this kind of game isn't fun. I guess I'm able to enjoy the experience just in the way that you would enjoy a gritty TV series. And the fact that you're in it and making the decisions for those characters just makes it that bit more immersive. It's incredibly hard to keep your characters alive. It's a punishing cooperative game, probably more so than Robinson Crusoe. But again, that fits the theme, and for me, it's just all about experiencing the story, and this tells a story unlike any other board game I've ever played. This War of Mine. Number 23 is Magic Maze. This is a real-time cooperative game where you're all playing together against a timer to try and get the characters, these fantasy adventurer characters, through a shopping mall to steal their weapons and then get out in time. But what's so challenging about it is that you can't talk to each other during this game, and that you each don't control a character, but you control a direction that these characters can move in. So I might control the up direction, and that means only I can take a character and move them upwards through the shopping mall. But to get around these winding paths, you need someone else to be able to move it left and someone else to move it down, and you really have to work together and understand what you're all trying to do, and you can't talk to each other. And that just makes a really intense experience. The game plays in like 15 minutes. And for example, you have to rush over to a spot to be able to flip the timer to keep the game alive. But if somebody hasn't noticed that, and you're trying to desperately get a character towards the timer, then you're probably not going to get there. And there's no way to communicate except for putting this big red pawn in front of them and saying, do something, but they don't know what to do. It's a game that is definitely not for everyone. I think some people could find it incredibly frustrating, but I think it really brings you together. And when you play it and you're struggling to get that mission every time, it's so addictive to want to keep coming back. Oh, we were so close. Oh, we just made that tiny little error. And ultimately, the errors are so human. It's not like the luck of the game. It's because you weren't paying attention, or you weren't going fast enough, or you weren't cooperating properly. What's great about Magic Maze as well is that there's so many different difficulty levels that you can keep adding. So if you ever feel like you've gotten good at it, don't worry, there's things that you can add, and you can get the expansion as well that just means that it's constantly challenging, and it means you're always on your toes. You can't kind of rest into a pattern with your group. I've actually recently played Magic Maze on Mars, which uses very similar ideas but introduces some new cool stuff. I have a feeling that might surpass Magic Maze long term, but we'll have to see on that one. Either way, this is a great game. Magic Maze. And number 22 is Quinto, and this is my favorite roll and write game. Yeah, it's in such an unassuming box, it really doesn't look impressive, but there's just something about this one. Even when I explain it to you, I don't think it necessarily sounds great. You really just have to play it. But this is also my favorite travel game. Every time I go on holiday, this one goes in the bag. The idea is that everyone has a bit of paper like this. There are 3 rows, red, yellow, and purple. And on your turn, you will roll some of those dice. There's 3 dice, one of each color, and you can decide to roll all 3 of them, or 1 of them, or 2 of them. But when you roll that dice, you add them up and you have to write them into one of the colors of the dice that you just rolled. So if you rolled all 3, you can put it in either row. But if you only rolled the purple dice, it has to go in the purple row. So if you're trying to get a low number, you'll just roll 1 dice on its own, but it can be really risky because there's strict rules about how you place numbers. So the numbers have to go from left to right. you can never repeat a number. Also, you're trying to score off certain things. So, for example, if you finish a row, you'll get the points equal to the highest number in that row by the end of the game. So, you really want to get really high numbers up here, but it's so hard to roll those numbers, or so unlikely, that you can put yourself in really tricky positions, pushing yourself to, you put a really high number up there early on because maybe like an 18 comes up, but then it's really hard to get the other numbers you're going to need to fill up, to fill the gaps. And that's the real frustration of the game, and that's why I love it, is that every roll you're really hoping for something, and if you end up not being able to write a number, then you have to take a penalty, and that's going to be like -5 points at the end of the game. And so there's this balance between pushing your luck so hard that you get loads and loads of points, or it really just coming back to haunt you and you getting punished for it. There's another way to get points is to finish off columns. So where there's these pentagons, if the number that you have in there will be points at the end of the game, but only if you finish the entire column. So you're really trying to get certain spots filled up, and that's enticing you to put numbers in places where you really shouldn't be placing them for the benefits of your rows. The way it all comes together is just incredible. The amount of decisions in this game for something so simple. And one of the other great rules is if it's your turn, you roll the dice, so you pick which colors are happening and you write the numbers in. Everyone else can write your results, but they don't have to, and they won't be punished if they can't. But if it's your turn, you get the opportunity to re-roll once. So you might get a number that's okay, but not that great. And do you push your luck to use that one re-roll? Because you might end up getting something that you absolutely can't place on your sheet, and that's going to cost you, but you might get the thing that you really want. So it's just another element of push your luck. It's an amazing roll and write game. As far as I'm concerned, this meets all the criteria of like a classic roll and write game. You could really expand it. It says 6 players, but you could play with loads if you wanted to skip that re-roll rule. And it's simultaneous, so you're all playing off the same dice results, so there's none of this dice drafting that slows some roll and write games down. And it's all just bits of paper in a tiny box. It's amazing. The amount of game that you get in this, I just absolutely love it. That is Quinto. And number 21 is Detective, a modern crime board game. And this is an epic crime-solving cooperative game. I absolutely love these games where you get to read through a story and try and solve a mystery together, because it just makes me feel like being a detective. You've got these clues, you've got witness reports, you've got evidence, and you are just having to discuss with your fellow players, your fellow detectives, who you think did it, why they did it. Detective is the richest version of that. This is long cases that you really get involved with, where there's lots to pore over. There's lots of different ways to get evidence in Detective, which I think is really cool. And that it adds this extra timed aspect where you have limited time. You can't do everything. You can't turn over every stone. Just like a real detective, you have to focus on where you think the proper leads are. And you'll go down certain paths, and ultimately you might regret it because you won't get the information you need. And you're having to do that based on a hunch. And you're having to make decisions based on your real world knowledge of stuff. And the really cool twist with Detective is that you actually use real world information to solve the cases. So everything, a lot of the information you get in the game comes through this portal, this website, so you need to access it on your phone or a laptop. And you'll get interviews with people, really long things to go over, and you can get information about whether they seemed like their heart rate was up whilst they were saying certain things, so you can kind of track their emotions. You get all these character profiles and information about their height and weight and things, and of course you've got to decide which things are relevant to you, and there's so much scope for taking notes. But there'll also be times where it's effectively asking you to turn to the real internet, to look on Google Maps and actually look up locations in America and research what's nearby and how the case makes sense with those surroundings, to look up things on Wikipedia, to learn the history about the cases that you're dealing with. And that is just amazing. It takes the immersion of this type of game to a whole nother level, because you are actually having to do research that real detectives would have to do. This game brings you in like no other detective game, and it's long for sure, but I feel like you're really rewarded with this rich case where you never really know where it's going until you've pieced it all together, and there's so much to get your head around, and I just absolutely love it because the deeper in you go, the better it feels, the more fun it is for me. That is Detective, a modern crime board game. Those were my 30 to 21st favorite board games of all time. If you'd like to buy any of them, there are links in the description. I can't currently afford to keep making videos long term, so if you'd like to help keep the channel going, please pledge your support at patreon.com/Actualol, just like Michael Fisher did. Thank you, Michael. I'm Jon Purkis. Thanks for watching.